Welcome back to another edition of Components Breakdown. Today we're going to look at an older game that was first published in 2006. It is a Euro-style game called The Pillars of the Earth. It is a 2 to 4 player economic worker placement game that takes place in the 12th century. The overall theme of the game is that each of the players is going to take on the role of a builder who's trying to contribute the most to the cathedral's construction, and in doing so they score victory points. Now, the gameplay roughly consists of each player using workers to produce raw materials and then using those materials through their craftsmen upon which to earn victory points and gold as the game progresses. So let's first open up the box. We're going to first show you the components, and then we'll get into some of the basic gameplay and give you some of my final thoughts at the end. One of the nicer things about the Pillars of the Earth is that at first glance it seems to be a fairly easy game to learn. Once you start getting into the game, there's some obvious strategies that can be used, which really opens up the gameplay for not only beginners but people that are experienced with the game. And that's attributed as well to the rule set. It's an 8-page rule book that comes with the game, and it's very well written with plenty of examples in here for each of the phases of the game. Now, digging in a little bit deeper, the first thing we're going to see is a cloth bag, and this is used to house all the master builders for the master builder phase. It comes with a very nicely illustrated game board, and we'll go over all the aspects of that in a moment. There are several cards that ship with the game, and before we get into that, I want you first to take a look at the insert. It's a very nice insert that they use. Now, this distracts from people using their own things like Plano boxes, so you have to kind of use baggies and such, but still, the insert is one of the nicer looking inserts you'll see in the game, definitely one of the most unique. So moving on though, you're going to see several different cards that ship with the game, and they range from resource cards to summary cards you saw here on the bottom. There are phase cards or craftsman cards that are used for the different phases in the game. There's privilege cards, and there's starting cards with each player's 3 starting craftsmen. And they're all color coordinated, which is quite nice. There is a die in the game, and the die consists of numbers that range from 2 to 5, with 2s and 3s, with 3s and 4s having 2 of each. And that's used for the tax phase of the game. There is a over-glorified turn marker in the game, which are wooden components that are used for the cathedral, and they each have their own individual space in here, which again is quite nice for the insert. There are several different resources, being wood, sand, stone, and the blue ones being the metals. And then there's markers for each of the games. There's scoring markers, there's gold markers, which are placed on the gold track. There's master builder markers, which is the large pawn looking thing. And there are workers for each of the characters, and they come in small and large worker denominations. Also, there's some gray ones which count as extra workers that you can hire from the castle. So that is what comes with the game, and let's actually set up a 2-player game and start talking about some very basic gameplay. I'm not going to get into all the rules, but it's going to give you an idea of what I think about the game. So let's move forward. So I've set up a 2-player game, and we're going to walk through the components one more time and show you what the game ships with, how the game lays out, and a basic overview of the gameplay mechanics. We're not going to go into actual gameplay because I want to spend a little more time with my final thoughts on the game. So let's first look at the players and what they each start off with. So each player is going to get the colored markers for their player. Now there are 3 master builders, which again are represented by these pawns. There's 7 small builders, which act as 1 worker each, and a large builder, which acts as 5. So there's a total of 12 workers that you see here. And then each player is going to start off with the same exact craftsman, being a woodworker, a mortar mixer, and a stone cutter. Looking at the cards, each of them will have a resource, a capacity, and the number of victory points that they can turn a specific item into. So for those who play a lot of games, you're going to notice that sand, they can do it 3 times and they get 1 victory point. And then stone, 2 stone, 4 times for 1 victory point. Very easy to understand. And then on the bottom, the game starts off as such. Now there are 9 resource cards in the game, and the resource cards consist of the name, the number of workers to use that resource, and what you get from them. 2 of these are not used in a round, and the other 7 are. And then the same way with the craftsman. As I showed you at the top, There are rounds. There are 4 of these for each round. 2 of them you will have to purchase, and 2 of them are used on the shiring space here, which can be gathered for free when you place one of your master builders on these spots. So at the beginning of every round, you're going to take 2 of these, put them down here, 2 of them there, and 2 of the privilege cards are going to be placed on the King's Bridge. Let's actually start talking about gameplay now, and then we'll get into my final thoughts. So a typical gameplay turn is going to look something like this. It's actually broken into 3 different phases. Before the first phase begins, you're going to restock all the different items that need to be placed. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to reset the event card. So a new event's going to be taking place on that turn. 2 new privilege cards will be placed on the King's Bridge. 2 of the 4 craftsmen for that round will be placed on the shiring, with the other 2 being placed at the bottom of the board. And you're going to put a new piece of metal on the King's Court. All of the extra workers, which are the gray workers, will be placed back on the shiring, and there's 4 total that will be placed. And then you're going to restock the resources at the resource market. So a typical turn is going to look something like this. The first phase of a turn is called the selection of resource cards and craftsmen. So each of the players in turn is going to look at these cards down here at the bottom and choose what they want to purchase. And when they're done, it goes on to the next player, and when a player passes, they're out for the rest of the round. So what are they selecting from? They're selecting from 2 of the craftsmen and from 7 of the total 9 resource cards. So let's go in a little bit deeper about what you have to do. If a player were to select one of these 2 cards, they would have to pay an amount of gold equal to that card to purchase. And you notice, as I said before, there is a gold track at the bottom. And when someone buys something, you simply move their gold down that number of spaces. Now each player is going to start off with 3 craftsmen, as we had previously mentioned. There is a limit to 5 total craftsmen that a player can have on their side. So you'll need to know that as the game progresses. Now the craftsmen get better as the rounds progress as well. So a mortar mixer from round 1, and this is a mortar mixer from the start of the game, they're going to vary, and I'll show you why. One of the craftsmen that you start with requires 3 sand to get 1 victory point, while a first rounder only requires 2 sand. So your resource needs are going to diminish as your victory point scale is going to go up. So the other part is the resources. Now each of these has a different resource amount at the bottom and a different kind. And they have a value at the top. That's the number of workers you're going to have to place in that specific area. So if Blue wanted to take the forest space right here, he'd have to place 6 of his people, which could be 6 small ones or a big one and a small one. And he simply places those tokens into the forest and takes that card and puts it on his tableau. Now people can buy as many resources and as many craftsmen as they want, as long as they're available on his turn and he has the resources to pay for them. When that phase is finished, we go to the Master Builder assignments. Now each of the players starts with those 3 pawns that we had talked about earlier, which look like this. All the pawns are placed into a bag, and the starting player is allowed to pick one of those pawns. When he picks the pawn, he can, once during his entire turn, decide to not play that pawn and put it back into the bag. What happens on this phase, though, is that when a pawn is taken out, they're placed on this track here on the bottom. And the first pawn to be placed is this one, and it costs 7 gold for the blue player to place his pawn somewhere on the board. You'll notice on the board there's several white spaces. And when a pawn is placed on there, that person gets to take that particular action. So if he were to pay 7 gold, since he was the first player, he'd move his pawn down, or he'd move his gold track down 7 and place it somewhere on the board. For instance, this one gives you 2 victory points immediately. And these will give you the privilege card that is above them. So they must make a decision on whether or not they want to do that. And each turn, someone new will be taken out of the bag and placed on the next marker. A player can either pass or decide to spend the gold. Now, of course, the first players that get to use their spots get the pick of the spots on the board, which is advantageous, but they're also paying the most gold. And this continues until all the players pass. or there's no more spots available. And then it goes back to the track and everything else will be done for free in the order that they were drawn. So that's a very nice mechanic that you'll find in the game, is actually doing the master builder phase. The last phase of the game, of a turn, is actually carrying out the actions of the board in the order upon which they show up on the board. So as I said previously, each spot on the board has a particular number associated. This is the Archbishop's office, and this is the second thing that happens. So each player is going to go through and take an action and remove their master builder. And once that part is done, they're actually going to go in and create the resources and do the actions of their pawns. So when you get to the last, or the 13th phase here, this is when the majority of the scoring takes place, and this is called the Cathedral, in which all players take victory points from their craftsmen. So when you have gathered the resources, for instance, this person, when it gets to the number, I've covered up the forest there, the number 6 space, this person's going to look at what they've had. They've got the forest, so they're going to remove their workers and take 3 of these wood tokens and put them on their side. So going back to that 13 space, they're allowed to convert all of their resources into victory points. So he has 3 wood, and he would look down here and say he can use 2 of them to make a victory point. So he just returns these back to the supply, gets the victory point, and he moves on. So there is a limit to the number of these that you can carry from one turn to the next, and that is 5 total resources. So that's basically how the game is played. It's played over 6 total rounds. The game, like I said, takes about an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, depending on the experience level of the players. Also, it can be extended even further if you have the expansion for the game. Now, a couple things I wanted to say about Pillars of the Earth. I think it's a really good game. I actually bought it because a friend of mine named Adam Dalton introduced it to me. Now, I'd known about the game for quite some time, but for some reason the stars never aligned and I never actually picked it up or had played it. So be it, he finally introduced me to the game, and I really enjoyed it when I played it. Now, having played it a couple more times since then, I found out that I don't actually enjoy it as much as I thought I would, and the reason for that is that the game takes, I believe, an extreme amount of time to play. It becomes very redundant for me, and there's a lot of moving of pieces. For instance, each round, you're always reshuffling the cards, dealing out 7 new ones. You're putting out new cards to the craftsman spot, new cards to the privileged spot, new cards to the event spot, moving out old craftsmen, moving in new craftsmen, taking things off the board, refilling the market, and there's just a lot of movement of items from one turn to the next, which is a deterrent for me, not in the fact that it's bad gameplay, it's just it's something that slows and bogs down the game. Where a game like Stone Age, I feel that in its simplicity, it's a little bit easier for novices to play, and I think this is a game that's really geared towards a family atmosphere. It's not something that's deeply strategic, so it's not geared towards your hardcore strategy Euro game style players. So I would feel that the simplicity should be implicated in the mechanics, which they simply aren't. It's just too cumbersome for me, I guess is what I'm saying. Overall, though, the mechanics work wonderfully well. It is a game that makes sense for the most part. And saying that, the other thing I did want to say about the game that I forgot to say is the fact that I don't like the over-glorified turn marker. I don't feel that the theme of the game really meshes with building a cathedral. Now, what happens, and I've already put the cathedral in here, but every turn one player, the starting player, is going to put a new piece into the cathedral, and by the 6th turn the cathedral is built. But you're not actually building the cathedral, you're just building victory points. So there's kind of a disconnect between the theme of building a cathedral, which they really say in the storyline for the game, and actually building the cathedral, which you're not doing. Again, these are really small, nuanced things for myself, and they have no bearing on the gameplay whatsoever. It's a good game. It's a solid game. The mechanics make sense to play. It just doesn't make sense to the theme for me, I guess is what I'm saying. So that is Pillars of the Earth. I would highly suggest it if you're into worker placement games. Give it a shot. Just know that it's a little bit long to play in the teeth. And thanks again for watching.